The agenda this week revisited Ukraine's catastrophic famine under Soviet rule with author Anne Applebaum. We debated the state of Ontario's provincial debt and assessed on-the-job cancer risks for trades and construction workers. The agenda's Week in Review begins considering just how to get some of our less engaged citizens interested in provincial politics. It's not that we don't like politics. Apparently, well, let's just take 2011, for example. There were two elections in 2011, a federal election in which 70% of us voted, which is not bad, and a provincial election in which fewer than half of us voted.
Yeah.
Now, I don't get this because the big issues that really touch our lives are provincial. Healthcare, education, social justice, social assistance, highways, everything. Help us understand this. Why?
I think there's two sides to it. The first one being, especially for youth, federal politics tend to be a bit sexier. It's what you see across media. It's what we are faced with every day. It's the first thing you will see when you open your Twitter feed. And it's also in relationship with other countries. We're obviously very affected by what's happening south of the border in the United States. And so youth will tend to gravitate towards that because these are the figures that they recognize and that they can identify with. The other side of it is actually quite simple. Students and youth in general don't really understand the difference between different levels of government. So sometimes they won't even know that provincial government is responsible for education and healthcare. However, once you start identifying and clearly differentiating what each level of government does, students will tend to have a better understanding and more of an interest towards provincial politics because they do realize that day to day, they spend their entire days in schools.
Okay, but the name of your group is civics, and civics is what we learn in school.
Yes.
So how do we not know the difference between what the city does, what the province does, and what the feds do?
So that's a complex question. Civics is sometimes a half credit in schools across Ontario, which means that it's a half semester. So a winter semester, for example, will be split between careers and civics. And oftentimes now civics is taught as an online course that students can do over the summer rather than do with a professor and with engaging their community.
So it feels like a bit of a throwaway in some respects.
It can be, which is what we're trying to combat by working directly with educators.
Seher, I appreciate the fact that in the last federal election, there was a youthful, attractive candidate leading the Liberal Party, which may have got youthful, attractive young people more interested in politics, and he had a policy to legalize marijuana, which may have been of particular interest to young people. But that aside, how else do you account for the fact that we don't show up, for provincial elections the way we do for federal elections?
Well, I think you have to look at the different populations that are voting and what the voting rates are like. So for example, with Canadian Muslim Vote, now this is a federal example, but we did some research and we found that in the 2011 election, the Canadian Muslim population only voted at a rate of around 35 to 45%, which is well below the national average of 61%. Now, obviously, provincial voter turnout is lower across the board, so you can hypothesize that for a community who has traditionally lower voter turnouts, the same would be true for the provincial election. And there's a lot of barriers for different communities who have a difficult time, either staying engaged, being educated and aware of the issues that are facing them, and even just simply going out to vote.
Well, Campaign Research did some campaign research on this, as you might expect. Sheldon, let's bring this up. This is Board 3. Why don't immigrants in Ontario vote? Picking up on what Seher just had to say. 64% of immigrants who have been in Canada for 5 to 8 years say they didn't vote because they weren't registered to vote. 16% of them say the parties don't reflect their views or their opinions. 11% say they just don't trust politicians. 9% said they just don't like politics, compared to 17% of those born in Canada, incidentally. 5% said they were too busy. 13% of those born in Canada say that. Martin, let me get you to pick up on some of those numbers. I suppose at some level those are all reasonable justifications for not showing up to vote, except that this stuff's important.
Well, a couple of things, though. Let's deconstruct that. 64, roughly 2/3 of people not born in Canada believed they weren't registered to vote. Almost certainly they were wrong about that assumption, because the likelihood is that they were eligible to vote and could have voted if they had presented themselves, were sworn, and had initiated some registration formalities. But the fact that so many immigrants wrongly believe, and so many Canadians and so many young people, because we see that also for young people, believe that they're not allowed to vote, is a challenge, but it's also an enormous opportunity. It means that these are people who in the case of immigrants, new Canadians, are actually quite motivated to vote, because the numbers you just showed, Steve, suggest that they actually are more interested and are more engaged than Canadian-born voters. So the bad news is that they're not voting. The good news is they can be easily, not just coaxed, they're already motivated. Where there is a will, we just need to show them the way, and it can be done.
Well, Seher, I've heard you say in the past that you think some are afraid to vote. Why would that be? Some immigrants are afraid to vote.
Yeah, it depends on the country. So for example, anecdotally, what we found in our community work in 2015, if there were people who came from countries where democracy was the norm, they were more likely to be engaged and not fearful of the system. However, in cases where there are immigrants who have recently come here and they are coming from a place where they could not trust their government or there was a fear of authorities, even something as simple as receiving a robocall from a political party could be something to be fearful about. Like, how did they get my phone number? How do they know who I am? It's when you have that distrust, when you've grown up with that in the country of your origin, sometimes that can present some barriers. And we really try to overcome those barriers by presenting, celebrity endorsements, people who are recognizable in the community, to kind of dispel some of those myths and get engagement going.
Well, I guess my question to both Catherine and Vic is what are you going to cut? If you think the debt is such a big problem, that means you not only have to balance, but you have to run surpluses, and that will involve significant cutting. We made the conscious decision to go into deficit this year and that for the next few years so we could invest in childcare, which has a payoff because more women will enter the workforce and will contribute to the economy. We're investing in mental health, as I said, because the sooner you can treat someone, the earlier you can identify a mental health issue, the better off over the long run. The cost of care is less and the productivity of the individual who's facing that challenge is improved. No matter what you look at in our spending, we spend now to save over the long run. And that's exactly what I believe we need to do. I think the people of this province are going to pass judgment on it. But Vic and Catherine have to come clean. They have to choose, are they going to cut or are they going to invest? And Catherine in the last election wanted to be the Minister of Cuts. Yeah. And she thought she could find $600 million in healthcare and education. And I don't think this is the time we should be cutting healthcare and education.
Well, I do want to address that. I mean, we thought there was $600 million in misspent money, and actually we were underestimated in that regard. I mean, the Auditor General found $8 billion through the public-private partnerships, which was the building of schools and of hospitals. So it turned out to be a low estimate. But that was a reaction to a pattern of poor decisions that put Liberals ahead of the people that we're serving. Now, if that debt was accumulated and through the building of long-term care homes, there are 34,000 people on a wait list to get into long-term care. That's why we have a hospital crisis. We have seniors in hospitals that have no place to go and no plan for aging in place.
But surely some of that debt was incurred, building hospitals, building long-term care homes, building schools, etc.
It's the way that that infrastructure was built. I mean, that's what the Auditor General, and the Auditor General is an independent officer of the legislature. There's no partisanship here. She said, you overspent by $8 billion in these public-private partnerships, putting the private interests of those contractors ahead of the public. And this is a government who has lost credibility with the public and where trust is a very serious issue. We would, I mean, the question is from Deb is, where would you invest? We would be more strategic in where we invest. We would ensure that the return on investment for infrastructure, like the two-way all-day go service to KW, which would draw investment from businesses, and they are so hungry from a firm commitment from any government going
And that
forward.
is exactly what...
No, you didn't. You didn't. You promised a bullet train in the last election. The bullet train is not coming anytime soon.
Yes, in fact, it is. We allocated in this budget that you've already said you're going to vote.
Okay, stand by, everybody.
$11 billion
stand by.
to build high-speed rail.
Let's get Vic Fideli in here. Deb Matthews made the point a moment ago, Vic Fideli, that if you object to the size of the deficit and the size of the Ontario debt, that presumes that you're going to rein in spending in order to tackle it. How would you propose to do that?
Well, I can tell you the first three cuts would be waste, mismanagement, and scandals. The Auditor General spent a considerable amount of time, 2014, 15, 16, and 17, in her annual reports, showing that debt continues to grow faster than our economy. And she's highlighted the waste in each of those years, which has added up to billions upon billions of dollars, whether it's in the overspending on Presto or Pan Am Games or the gas plant scandal, the e-health, the smart meters. The list goes on and on of billions of dollars that were handled through waste or mismanagement, and in many cases, scandals. So you've got billions there, and you've got an Auditor General who is telling you you're paying your debt with you're paying off your MasterCard with your Visa every single month. We're borrowing money to pay our borrowing. It just makes absolutely no sense. And so you've got opportunity with all of the waste that's there, and she's outlined it very carefully. In fact, comment. Just in this last report, she outlined 14 agencies where she could save $1 billion.
Okay, Deb Matthews.
So, Vic, your leader, Doug Ford, has said he is going to cut 4% off the operating budget of this province. 4%. And he pretends that's easy. And he says I can do it with bulk purchasing of foolscap and pencils. It is absurd. It is not easy to cut 4%. In fact, the cuts that your party is proposing, Vic, are far worse than what Mike Harris ever did. 4 cents
Deb,
off
you're
every
making
dollar.
that up and you know it. I mean,
that's Doug Ford. I'm quoting your leader. Doug Ford says 4 cents on every dollar is going to be slashed.
All you have to do is look at your own budget. On page 224, bottom right-hand corner, third line from the bottom, you're showing, quote, efficiencies. You only used the word once. You're afraid of that word, but you did get it in there. Efficiencies of $1.425 billion. When you annualize that, and repeat that in year 2 and annualize that, and repeat it in year 3 and annualize that, and add year 4, that's $14.4 billion in efficiencies that your budget says you could find. I think if you, being the most spendthrift government, can do that, I'm pretty sure Doug Ford and the PCs can do a better job.
I would almost argue that the asbestos industry was the beginning of creating the junk science. We know what the tobacco industry did. I would argue that it was the asbestos industry in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s that created a lot of the junk science.
Now, if you, Valerie, wear a mask, if you have exposure as a worker to this stuff, does that get the job done?
Not really, no. Because I mean, you can wear a mask to protect you, but you need to have, the way asbestos work is done is under negative pressure, so it has to be a specialized ventilation system, so that and then filtered by a HEPA filter. So the mask is like insurance, but it's not sufficient protection by itself. And in fact, for asbestos work to be done, people have to shower in and shower out as well, because the fibers otherwise become attached to clothing. Right. And then there are what are called secondary exposure cases, even allowed by WSIB occasionally, of spouses who have become had their health affected by the asbestos that was brought home.
By secondhand exposure?
By,
oh,
yeah,
my goodness.
Secondary
okay.
exposure.
What about silica dust? What does that actually do to you if you inhale that?
It's an inhaled dust that causes diseases, respiratory diseases up to and including lung cancer. But silicosis is even more common. It affects even more people. So there's, I guess, degrees of severity, but none of it's good, I guess I would say.
Paul, am I hearing this right? Diesel fumes? People are getting in trouble now with diesel fumes? Explain that.
Well, I mean, diesel exhaust has long been suspected as a cause of cancer. There's been research, but more definitive research was done in the last 10 years, and it's now been classified as a definite human carcinogen. And that's big because a lot of people are exposed to diesel. Now, especially at work where the levels are much higher than you might experience on the street, but even as an environmental concern, it's of concern.
Are you talking about underground garages, that kind of thing?
Underground garages, mining, construction where that happens below grade, or sometimes you see buildings in the winter where they've kind of wrapped them up to try to keep the wind out of them. Well, then if a vehicle operates within that, again, diesel exhaust can build in. We have no idling rules that are certainly not always followed. And my office looks across the street at a hospital, and still I see, you know, trucks idling outside with diesel trucks.
Now that is ironic. They're outside a hospital with the engine idling when there are plainly rules in place to prevent that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not good.
I think there's not enough consciousness about really the health effects. It's been with us for a long time, and you know, we have to constantly remind people that this is a serious issue, and we have to introduce more enforcement.
Carmen, yeah, what about if you live near a construction site or you're passing by a construction site and you know, there's diesel exhaust as a part of all of that, are you in any jeopardy under those circumstances?
Well, I think the biggest problem would be not the bystander, because you're not actually be in the vicinity of the exposure. It's the actual worker, I think, that's more exposed. Now, could there be exposure to the general population? Yes, but the biggest problem is the actual worker in the vicinity of that equipment. That is something that, again, I don't think any employer in the province wakes up in the morning and says, hey, today I'm going to expose anybody. But I think that what does happen is, as you start the construction project, the best laid plans as a result of circumstances that happen sometimes are just put aside. Think of it this way. In construction, we still have a problem with workers falling from heights. We still have a problem of workers being struck by and killed by struck-bys. So now, can you imagine we're saying, okay, deal with the factors that you know, that you see. Now we're telling them to deal with things like diesel or asbestos, silica, that's not out there.
That they can't see.
They can't see. So I think what needs to happen is we need to be re-looking at the way the whole idea of work is structured in construction.
Well, hold off on that. We're going to get to that in a second.
Yes.
Because I still want to, if we remember our original checklist, we've got to get to solar exposure.
That's
so that's the next thing on the list. What are you telling people to do in order to reduce, you know, as we suggested, agricultural workers, construction workers, outdoors, all day long, you know, hot sun in the summertime, not a factor these days, but what are you telling? Soon we hope. What are you telling people they got to do?
We're telling them, as is referred to in the Burden of Cancer report, that you need to protect workers. When work is to be done outdoors, there needs to be a plan around the hazards of the sun, so that it's a carcinogen, the solar radiation, and there needs to be a plan to protect people. And it's not to protect the people at the individual, it's to create shade, basically, or to manage the work in ways that people aren't working between the peak times of 11 to 3, manage the work so that any work that can be done indoors is done indoors, manage the work so that there's rotation of staffing, so not the same person out there for 8 hours, but somebody for 2 hours, somebody for 2 hours, somebody for 2 hours, things like that. There's lots of different ways that you can minimize exposure to sun.
We are going to spend some time tonight on this program on what is one of truly the most horrific chapters in human history. So let's set the scene. It is spring, summer 1933. If you were visiting, traveling through Ukraine at that time, what would you have seen?
By the spring and summer of 1933, most of the villages in some parts of Ukraine would have had most of the food removed from them. In other words, teams of activists had gone from house to house and taken everything: grain, potatoes, vegetables, cows, whatever livestock anybody had, whatever.
On Stalin's orders.
On Stalin's orders, on the orders of the party. They would have removed all of the food. They then blocked the roads. They blocked the roads of the Republic of Ukraine, and they tried to prevent peasants from going from the countryside to the city. And so what you would have seen, and that was in the autumn, winter of 1932-33. And so by the spring and summer, you would have seen scenes of real devastation. You would have seen whole villages that were completely empty. You would have seen possibly dead people lying on the streets or in the train stations. You would have seen piles of bodies unburied because there was really nobody to bury them. You would have seen mass graves in places where people had managed to bury them but didn't have the energy to do anything else. You would have seen fields that were untended. By that time, they were bringing in students and other people from outside the Republic to bring in the harvest because there was nobody else to do it. You would have seen institutions completely disorganized. The church was not functioning. Many churches had been destroyed or had their bells taken down. Many priests had been sent away. The whole fabric of what had been the Ukrainian countryside was destroyed.
It's a failed state, essentially. Nothing's working.
Nothing would have been working. Nothing would have been happening the way it was supposed to. And people were starving or had already starved.
We pointed out in the intro that you are certainly no stranger to trying to document Soviet atrocities. But I wonder whether even you were shocked by what you uncovered as you looked at the records that had never before been seen.
So what's really awful about this story, and is a little bit different, as you say, even from the previous books I'd written, is that there's really nobody who kept a memoir or who wrote about it in a way that is in any way uplifting. You don't find, as you do with people who are in the Gulag, that they came to some understanding about themselves or about humanity or the human will to survive. It's really a story of semi-literate peasants dying of starvation. And what happens to human beings when they die of starvation is very unedifying. Honest people become thieves. They become murderers. They are willing to steal from their neighbors. Some of them even become cannibals. People literally go insane with hunger. And it's very, very unattractive. People lose their humanity. Actually, unattractive is the wrong word. I mean, it's horrifying almost beyond belief. I found it a really difficult book to write.
Is there a consensus as to how many people perished because of this forced famine?
There isn't exactly a consensus, but there are kind of better and worse numbers. I use the numbers that were put together by a group of Ukrainian demographers who went back through all kinds of archives, local archives, and put together lists of people who, anyway, they made an estimate based on how many people should there have been and how many people there were actually. Because, of course, as you know, if you read the book, a lot of the statistics were subsequently falsified. So it's been difficult to go back and use those.
Well, the census.
The census.
They faked the census.
The census was actually faked, yes. But the team that did that, they came up with a number of 3.9 million people who had died unnaturally. In other words, those are the number of people who died over the number whom you would expect to die in those years.
I think what was new to me was the information that Stalin sent his henchmen to people's farms to steal their food. I wasn't aware of that part of the story. The conventional wisdom has always been all of these people died because the Kremlin forced collectivization on all of the farms. And I think we should just take a moment and explain what that entailed. Can you help us with that?
Yes, it's very important to understand. That, I think, is the main achievement. That's the main thing that the archives have taught us that we didn't know previously, because for many years people knew that there had been starvation in the Soviet Union after collectivization. And I should say there was a lot of starvation in Russia, in other Soviet republics. In Kazakhstan, there was a terrible famine that had other causes as well. But the specific nature of the Ukrainian famine, why it was a little bit different, was due to a series of decisions that were taken, as I said, in the autumn of 1932. And that led to these teams of activists going into villages and taking food. So this wasn't a famine that was caused by bad politics. It was literally the confiscation of food and then shutting off the roads so that people couldn't escape. And that's a little bit different from how we've been accustomed to thinking about it in the past.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, April 20th, 2018. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.